Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Evans, and welcome to this visual lecture answering the question, what is the single most important thing we can do to manage our stress? A few years ago, we moved our family to France for 3 months. It was the time of the European Cup football championships, and so we would take our kids to the local bar to watch the game on TV. Watching the moods of people from different countries swing from pure joy to total anxiety to despair and back again was as entertaining as the game itself. And I wondered if there was any scientific analysis of how this kind of stress affects people. And it turns out there has been a study. In the quarterfinal of the 1996 championships between the French and Dutch teams, a draw at the end of overtime resulted in a sudden death penalty shootout, which was won by the French. When researchers looked back to see if there were health changes on that day, it turned out there was a relative increase in the risk of death from a heart attack by about 50% among the Dutch men on the day of the match compared with the 5 days on either side of the match. There was no such effect on French men, or women from either country for that matter. So this story is striking because it's about one event and really one negative health outcome of stress. But in reality, stress is very complex, multiple factors and multiple outcomes. The physiologist sees stress as increased blood pressure, heart rate, or changes in the chemicals that modulate the immune system. The social worker sees vulnerability with compromised social networks, coping, and problem-solving skills. The doctor sees increased visits. It's estimated that up to 70% of primary care visits are stress-related. Worse health outcomes, bad self-treatment with alcohol and drugs, gateways to depression and anxiety, and of course a worse quality of life. These perspectives represent the standard negative picture of stress, but I believe we also see a positive side to stress. Athletes who are able to find a stress level that is high, but not too high for optimum performance. Executives or mothers or aid workers who manage stress like a bicycle tire. They regulate enough pressure to keep rolling, but not too much so that if they hit a bump, they explode. And to me, this is really the most interesting question when we look at stress and health. How do some people undergoing intense stress remain healthy and even thrive, and what makes them stress resistant? Well, I think the answer is big and includes factors like how much control people feel they have in their lives, their social network, and I mean that in the old sense of the word, openness to change, attitudes like optimism, self-care skills such as exercising and humor, and so on. Research on mental health shows that we have sort of bento boxed more severe mental health issues and tried to figure out what works and what doesn't, which is great, but we have done much less research on the most common problem, stress, and when it is studied, it's usually in the context of other diseases. So based on the current literature, my pick for the single most effective treatment for managing stress is actually kind of a simple one. Change your thinking style. Most people think stress is something that happens to us, like a piece of steel on a bridge that is constantly being stressed and then eventually snaps. This is the physical model, but it's actually not the human model. The difference is that stress passes through a 2-pound piece of tissue on the top of your face called your brain. So we say things like, my job is stressful, or my friend Sylvia is stressing me out. But in fact, we create the stress in our brains. Your work or Sylvia isn't stressful. It's your thinking that brings the stress. Your brain is the volume dial that can turn the stress up, but I think it can also turn it down. People think we are born with certain attitudes and a thinking style, but the truth is stress management is a skill that can be learned. Dr. Mats Gullikson and his colleagues in Uppsala, Sweden, published a trial in 2011 in the Annals of Internal Medicine, following over 400 people, mostly women, who had had significant heart events such as a heart attack or bypass surgery. Half the group received usual care, and the other half got usual care plus cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. CBT has become an umbrella term where you learn practical techniques such as problem solving, relaxation, and challenging common thinking traps. So for example, a negative filter. So 5 people say, great job, and 1 says nothing, and you think you blew it. Fortune telling. I'm not going to that job interview. They'll just reject me. Mind reading. A friend walks by you without noticing, and you assume he dislikes you now. Polarizing or black and white thinking. I failed my diet by eating that piece of cake. Now I might as well eat the whole thing. And so on. And a thought record is then used to reframe your automatic thinking into more healthy thinking. As the American psychologist William James said over 100 years ago, the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. So the researchers wanted to see if people could use these techniques to reduce the daily experience of stress, time urgency, and hostility. And if so, did that lead to better outcomes? So not a drug, not a diet, not a stent, just changing the way you think. The participants were followed for over 7 years. Those that got the CBT had a 41% reduction in heart attacks and a 28% lower death rate. The more CBT sessions the person attended, the better they did. Now, another way to change your thinking style in order to reduce stress is through the use of mindfulness techniques. Mindfulness used to be more for what I would call the kumbaya crowd, but programs have actually become much more mainstream. In fact, my patients who have heart attacks or have chronic diseases now often take a mindfulness course as part of their treatment, and there's a growing evidence about its effectiveness. A recent trial following clinically depressed patients by Dr. Zindel Segal and colleagues from the University of Toronto is a good example. When the patients experienced remission, they were randomized to an antidepressant or a placebo or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. The results showed that mindfulness was as protective against relapse as the medications. My sense is that the success of mindfulness is due partly to the fact that it combines many useful techniques for stress reduction, such as increased self-awareness, involving a physical component like breathing or muscle relaxation, meditation, and perhaps most importantly in our busy world, an emphasis on letting go of distractions and being in the moment. Mindfulness can give us the ability to let go of worry and not get trapped in the anxious loops. Perhaps less about changing the thought and really more about choosing where to place your attention. As the famous Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl pointed out, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And I think mindfulness teaches us awareness of that space and that we have the power of choice. So another factor that the research tells us impacts your thinking style is your attitude, your outlook on life. Dr. Suzanne Cabas and her colleagues from the University of Chicago looked at this by following a natural experiment in the 1980s breakup of the Ma Bell telephone company. They followed who coped well and who didn't and identified 3 key traits of those that coped well. The first notion was commitment. The stress-resistant executives were committed to different aspects of their lives. So even while facing uncertainty, they stayed committed to quality work, engaging with family and friends, their communities, their faith, their hobbies. They saw, and I think were committed to, the bigger picture of success. And this allowed them to weather the turbulence in a specific area of their lives. The second notion was control. And this is interesting in that because of restructuring, these executives actually had little control. In fact, you might say their skill in fighting stress was more about being able to let go of control. They could see that the sands were shifting, and if they were too rigid in their control of a territory or a department, they might actually lose the bigger opportunity or even their job. Other psychological research is focused on what we call locus of control or self-efficacy, which is really the extent to which individuals believe they can control events that affect them and their competence or ability to make change. The executives may have understood that a lot of what was happening was out of their control, but they could adapt and I think even choose and feel competent about what they could control. The third notion was change. The stress-resistant execs were able to limit their self-importance and see the change happening around them as a potential stepping stone, not a stumbling block. So as we come to the end of our story about what reduces stress, it might be helpful to know that the research has shown that simply writing out a stress story can make a big difference. The act of giving coherence and I think creating your own personal narrative to stressful events in a letter can be an effective way of negating the stress of those events. The classic therapeutic letter writing exercise is writing a letter to somebody who stresses you out and then not posting it. Finally, I'd like to leave you with this advice to improve your thinking style. Think basics. When I play tennis and things are going badly, which is often the case, I forget about everything else and say, move your feet, watch the ball. That's it. When things are stressful, sometimes you need to keep it simple. Say to yourself, I will keep a regular sleep routine. I will avoid eating crap. I will walk. I will mingle. And I think there's some early evidence for altruism or doing good. As Abe Lincoln said, when I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. And that is my religion. And I'm often reminded about the power of simplicity from a lesson one of my patients taught me. I did deliver bad news to him, and when I did, he kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, I'll be okay. I follow the 90-10 rule. 10% of how we do in life is based on what happens to us, and 90% is how we respond. I think the same may be true of stress. So take a deep breath. Think about your big picture of commitment, your sense of control, your openness to change. Consider doing some homework on yourself. Reframe your thinking. Redirect your attention. Maybe write a letter. Repeatedly, the evidence shows that if people manage their stress well, they have better health outcomes for virtually any disease they may suffer from. And remember that challenges will always be out there. That's life. But remember, too, that your thoughts and your attitude are the key holders for the stress you experience. Not the traffic, not your boss, not your job, not your neighbor, but you. And something you can improve, your thinking. Hope this helps. Thanks for listening.